Most people overpay for car insurance, not because they're careless, but because switching feels like too much hassle. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/Libsyn today. That's JERRY.ai/LIBSYN.
Criminology is a true crime podcast that may contain discussion about violent or disturbing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 417 of the Criminology podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson.
And this is Mike Morford.
Mr. Morford, how you doing this week, buddy?
Doing pretty good. A little bit stressed out, trying to go car shopping for my daughter and, getting her first car, getting her something that's going to be reliable. So that's on my plate. What are you up to?
Well, my kids are a little bit older than yours, but my oldest is trying to buy her first house. She just got married last month. And they're already trying to buy a house. So they're doing adult stuff, man. Kids grow up quick.
Yeah, first it's the car, then it's the house, and on and on.
Yep. It's always something, but it's usually something good, something fun. All right, let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. And we had one this week, but it's a great one from Padre Paul Ballin. He's been communicating with me both on TCAT and Criminology. So big listener, big fan.
That's awesome. And great username too. Thanks so much for that support. It really helps us out. And if anyone else wants to help the show out, head over to patreon.com/criminology to get started.
All right, Morf, let's jump right into this week's case. And I'm excited about this one. It's one that listeners are probably familiar with, thanks to a recent Netflix series diving into the deaths of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. They were tragically killed due to what was deemed to be a deliberate and intentional car crash. And it's a very tragic case, no doubt about it. But it seems as if the public is focused on the woman who's at the center of those two deaths, Mackenzie Shirilla. She was found guilty of murdering Davion and Dominic, but this Netflix series isn't the only show that's featured Mackenzie. There's been more than one. If you watch one series, you may come away with a little bit of doubt about events. Watch another, and you'll feel like this whole thing was meticulously planned by Mackenzie. So what we've decided to do in this episode is go back and look at the whole picture and let listeners decide for themselves what they believe happened.
It was early in the morning on July 31st, 2022. Everything was quiet. Officers in Strongsville, Ohio responded to a report of an accident and discovered a mangled Toyota Camry. A passerby saw the twisted wreckage and wasted no time calling in the police. The car was completely destroyed from hitting the side of a brick building at what was clearly a high rate of speed. The car was registered as 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla, who officers assumed they would find in the driver's seat, dead from the impact. Police at first weren't sure exactly when the accident happened, but from clues at the scene, they could tell it had been quite a while. As officers combed through the debris, they doubted whether anyone in the car would be alive, and they feared the worst.
Inside the car, Mackenzie's upper body was wedged under the passenger side dashboard. She was unable to move. Things looked grim, but they were shocked to find that not only was she alive, Mackenzie was conscious, and she could understand them. They asked her what her name was, and she was able to answer clearly. Now, she was a little bit confused and obviously injured, but she was alive. As first responders tried to figure out how best to tend to Mackenzie and get her out, they realized she wasn't the only person inside the car. 20-year-old Dominic Russo, Mackenzie's boyfriend, was in the passenger seat, and police knew instantly that he was dead. Dominic's friend, 19-year-old Davion Flanagan, was lying on his back on top of Dominic. He had been shoved forward when the car came to a sudden stop. However, Davion was still alive. Responders had to use tools to cut into the car and get the three out, since the car had crumpled around their bodies, trapping them.
A life flight chopper was brought in to get Davion to the trauma center, but sadly, by the time the helicopter arrived, he passed away. He and Dominic were both pronounced dead at the scene. Mackenzie was the only one left to save. She was rushed to the hospital where she underwent several surgeries. Doctors had their work cut out for them because she was very badly injured, but she survived. Her liver and one of her kidneys were lacerated, her carotid arteries were damaged, and her femur, arm, and 3 ribs were broken. After being released from the hospital, she required a wheelchair to get around. She also required physical therapy to help her walk correctly and strengthen her muscles.
And there's no doubt, Morf, this was a horrific car crash. I mean, you think about a car traveling at a very high rate of speed, hitting a brick building. It's not going to be good. And it wasn't good in this case. And I think one of the things that stands out is, kind of the first responders thinking there's not going to be anybody alive in this car. And yes, 2 people were pronounced dead. I think they were really shocked that anyone survived, that Mackenzie survived.
Yeah, it's clear that this was a major accident. You hit a brick wall, high rate of speed, and you have 2 people killed at the scene and one with serious injuries. This wasn't some kind of fender bender. This is a major accident.
Investigators were tasked with trying to figure out how this crash happened. By all initial appearances, this was just a horrific accident. Dominic and Davion's deaths were initially ruled accidental. The 3 had stayed over at a friend's house after a graduation party the night before. It seemed that Mackenzie was just driving everyone home. She had slept a few hours and should have been okay to drive. When news of the accident made its way around, friends of the trio were shocked and saddened by what happened. Mackenzie was said to be extremely distraught after learning that she was the only survivor of the crash. But friends and family of Davion and Dominic were suspicious that there was more to the story. Those friends had all of the history and knew all of the interpersonal details that authorities investigating the crash didn't. And Mackenzie's behavior after the crash didn't do anything to reassure them. Instead, they requested that officers look into the case more closely.
Following the crash, Mackenzie seemed mostly focused on herself. She wanted to use the attention she was getting because of the crash to launch a career as a model or an influencer. To many, this wasn't the way someone that was grieving would act. But things would look even worse. On Halloween, just 3 months after losing the so-called love of her life, Mackenzie celebrated by dressing up as what many people believed strongly resembled a corpse, and she took videos of herself dancing. Her TikTok seemed to make light of the situation. She made multiple videos while she was still in the hospital, and she gained a ton of followers during that time.
And Morf, I think to many people, it was her actions, Mackenzie's actions after this crash, the death of a friend, the death of her boyfriend, who she said was the love of her life, that really kind of threw people. I mean, I get it. She was 17 years old. 17-year-olds historically don't make the best decisions. But in this age of social media, her decisions really took on kind of a sinister light. She seemed to move forward with ease. And this idea that she was using this crash to kind of launch a career, I mean, it really rubbed people the wrong way. And it still does to this day.
Yeah, I remember a lot of cases where people look at how someone acts after the case unfolds, and they're looking at their every move, looking at their attitude. Are they laughing? Things like that. If they're making videos, all of that, forms opinions for people. And we've talked about it before, but you can't always tell what someone's thinking, if they're guilty or not, just from how they act. but it definitely paints a picture for people, from that perspective. It doesn't look good a lot of times.
For Dominic's friends and family, this crash didn't come out of nowhere. There was a history of dangerous driving, threats regarding the car, and suicidal ideation. First of all, according to court documents, Mackenzie herself captured a lot of instances, over 100 instances actually, of distracted and dangerous driving, doing things like making TikToks and Instagram reels, showing herself driving, usually speeding while not wearing a seatbelt, and sometimes even driving while smoking marijuana. The relationship between Mackenzie and Dominic was complicated. They were close. They had been together for years. Since Mackenzie was just 13 and Dominic was 16, they were a passionate couple. They thought they were in love. In fact, in court docs, multiple people described the two as very much in love. They had lived together for years, but they fought a lot, and it got worse over time. They had broken up many times, but always got back together. Dominic's mother recalled that in the 6 months before the crash, Mackenzie had started getting more possessive, and the relationship had become strained. And I'll tell you right now, one thing that jumped out at me, especially while I was watching the Netflix doc, but even in some of the other things that I've watched and the research that we did for the case, was Mackenzie living with Dominic at 17. Now, I get it, 17, okay, you're not technically an adult, but she had been living with him for a few years at that point, which means she probably started living with him when she was maybe 15. And at least in the Netflix documentary, her parents seem to be okay with that. They seem to be fine with that. Now, I'm not judging a person's parenting style. I only know that I wouldn't be okay with that. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, I'm, in agreement with you completely. It's not the norm. Some people choose to let their, older teen children go into a situation where they're living elsewhere. It happens. And, years ago, right out of high school, 17, 18, kids got married and stuff, but it's definitely seems a little bit different and out of the ordinary nowadays. Just weeks before the crash, Dominic called his mother and asked her to pick him up. He told her that he was in the car with Mackenzie, but she was driving erratically on Interstate 71. Dominic's mom could hear Mackenzie screaming over the phone, saying things like, "I'm going to wreck this car right now." Mackenzie eventually pulled over, but there appeared to be some kind of physical altercation between her and Dominic that ended with Mackenzie hitting Dominic. Finally, he was able to get out of the car. Later, Mackenzie claimed that Dominic had been grabbing her steering wheel and causing dangerous situations while she was driving.
Things continued to get worse between the couple. Videos were found after Dominic's death, showing Mackenzie's behavior when the two were alone. In one video, Dominic is seen refusing to let Mackenzie into his home because of how she is acting. She threatened to break in if he didn't let her in and told him there would be a real problem if he didn't start listening to her. According to Oxygen.com, texts between the two showed more of this behavior. Mackenzie in one text said, "I told you it's my way or the highway. I would watch your back from now on." And outside of domestic violence or any interpersonal relationships, Mackenzie had a history of suicidal ideation. In March of 2020, when Mackenzie was 15, police were called to her home because she had threatened to take her own life. According to court docs, she wasn't transported to the hospital and didn't receive any treatment because her parents reportedly didn't think her threats were real and didn't believe she would hurt herself. And Morf, I think this is, something that shows up quite a bit in the cases that we do. You have a lot of people looking at a couple, from the outside and saying they have the perfect relationship. They're in love. They're meant to be together. But then in a case where investigators have to dive in, what they uncover is anything but an ideal relationship. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that nobody might see, that really paints a much different picture of the relationship.
Yeah, a lot of times, from the outside looking in, people see a relationship that looks perfect or pretty well overall. But when you talk to people that know those people best, you'll find things that are not as easily to spot. Maybe there's some kind of fighting, domestic abuse. Maybe one of them is suffering from something, whether it's mental illness, suicidal ideations, something like that. You don't really know about that stuff until, you hear about a case like this where this stuff comes to the surface. And I think that's, interesting when you peel back the layers of the onion, like you talked about, you find these things.
And then I think you have to really analyze Mackenzie's history of suicidal ideation and then go back and kind of analyze what Dominic's mom heard over the phone. Mackenzie saying, "I'm going to wreck this car right now." And then, tie that into the crash that ultimately happened. Okay, what does it all mean? Was this a tragic accident, or was this something that Mackenzie did on purpose?
All of this stuff that investigators learned was troubling, but the more they dug into the crash itself, the more it began to paint a picture of exactly what happened. And it started to point to the crash possibly being a form of intimate partner homicide, as well as a murder-suicide. According to Life 360, which Davion had installed on his phone, he traveled for just 6 minutes. They got into the car, started driving at 5:30, and by 5:36, the crash had been set in motion. We don't know if Davion would have survived if the crash had been discovered sooner, and as far as we can tell, it isn't certain that Dominic died immediately on impact.
Mackenzie's blood had been tested at the hospital following the crash to rule out a DUI. Being intoxicated would have absolutely explained how such a horrific accident could happen, but there was no alcohol in her system. But she did screen positive for marijuana. Officers also found a bong, a bag of weed, just over 8 grams of psychedelic mushrooms, and a digital scale at the crash site. No mushrooms were found in Mackenzie's blood. If drugs were a factor in the crash, it was just marijuana. She wasn't drunk, and she wasn't tripping. Folks, it's summertime, and that means a couple of things to me. First of all, I don't think seem a little more relaxed in the summer, but it's also warmer. So I find myself reaching for comfortable pieces of clothing. And that's why I keep coming back to Quince. Quince focuses on well-made essentials that will really become your staples that you go back to again and again. Quince's 100% European linen pants and shirts are breathable, easy to throw on, and the summer upgrade your rotation needs, starting at just $34. And their tees are soft enough to wear day in and day out. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They can do this because they work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're paying for exceptional quality, not brand markup. And I'll tell you, one of the pieces that I grab almost on a daily basis is their activewear flow knit shorts. They're soft, they're breathable. I can wear them anywhere. And it's not just clothing. Quince has become a trusted favorite for everything from home to travel to everyday essentials. Make your summer wardrobe easier. Go to quince.com/criminology for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/criminology for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/criminology.
Investigators soon began to believe that Mackenzie wasn't under the influence of any kind of substance, and they didn't think this was a case of her losing control of the car. They started to suspect that she had crashed the car on purpose. A surveillance camera on a nearby building captured Mackenzie's car as it turned on the Progress Drive at 5:34 that morning. Everything looked perfectly normal. She wasn't swerving or speeding. She slowed down for the turn appropriately. She even used the turn signal. Within the next 2 minutes, the car began traveling faster, reaching 100 miles an hour at one point, hit a business sign in the grass, and then crashed into the corner of the brick building where it came to a stop. Importantly, the event data recorder in Mackenzie's car showed that the accelerator had been pressed all the way down. At the time of the crash, Mackenzie was literally flooring it or putting the pedal to the metal. There were no skid marks or any signs that she had tried to slow down. The surveillance camera just down the road from the crash site captured the car as it flew past at 90 miles per hour. There were no brake lights on at any point.
From the surveillance and the clues they uncovered at the crash scene, it looked like Mackenzie could have done this on purpose, but one argument against this being an intentional crash would be that it couldn't be proven that Mackenzie didn't suffer some sudden medical event that left her unable to try to stop. For example, she could have had a seizure or some other medical emergency that made her unable to respond or try to safely stop the car. The problem with this potential argument was that the gas pedal shouldn't have been pushed all the way down to the floor. If she lost consciousness, her foot should have just been limp, doing nothing. And I think, Morf, this is one of the things that people analyze and argue about online. If this was some kind of medical emergency, what should have happened to the car? Because I think some people could make an argument that, okay, if you lose consciousness, does your foot then just kind of, the weight of it, maybe floor the car? And others might say, no, it takes too much pressure. The car or the gas pedal shouldn't have been floored.
Yeah, I'm of the thinking that it takes a conscious action to put your foot down on the gas pedal to get it to accelerate. And I sort of feel that if you were to pass out, your foot pressure would automatically release. That's what I'm thinking. Again, I'm no expert at analyzing, that kind of body movement and control, but it just seems to me that that's what might happen.
And I'm sure there are people with way more expertise and training than you and I have that can help answer this question, but you can see why people are divided on certain aspects of this case.
According to court documents, Strongsville Police Department patrol officer Brent Robinson stated that at just 54 miles per hour or slower, he had to hold onto the steering wheel to make sure that he was in control because it was a rough road. Mackenzie was driving nearly double Officer Robinson's maximum speed, and when Mackenzie applied for a temporary driver's license after the crash, she agreed that she didn't have any condition that results in episodic impairment of consciousness or loss of muscular control. She had agreed with the same statement when she got her previous license in April 2021. So both before and after the accident, to Mackenzie's knowledge, she had no medical conditions that would interfere with her driving or that could have caused the crash. This is despite a supposed diagnosis of POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, in 2017. POTS is a disorder that can cause a high heart rate, dizziness, and fainting, but it happens generally upon standing. The P and O in POTS actually indicate that the T, the tachycardia, happens due to an upright posture. It's a real disorder, and it can absolutely cause a loss of consciousness. It's just the rest of the information that's causing some doubt here. Either Mackenzie didn't have an official diagnosis, didn't feel like her condition was severe enough to interfere with safe driving, or she intentionally withheld the information from the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
According to Mackenzie's mother, Natalie Shirilla, Mackenzie's POTS symptoms had flared up in the week or two before the crash, and despite Mackenzie being scared it was going to get worse, she didn't go to the doctor or stop driving. And it seems to me that Natalie fully supports her daughter, so much so that it's been said that she even spoke gibberish to try to keep information from officers in the room with them. And some people online have hypothesized that Natalie concocted a story that would support Mackenzie's innocence. She even seemed willing to stand in one specific spot outside of the jail that Mackenzie was eventually held in so that they could see each other through a small window, and Mackenzie would be able to read her lips without anyone else being part of the conversation. Now, Mackenzie may actually have POTS, and it may have been getting worse. There's stress, not taking care of yourself. All of those can certainly exacerbate the symptoms. But Natalie, being the only other person who can vouch for her daughter's POTS diagnosis and the flare-up, doesn't give most people a lot of confidence in it being the truth. She seems determined to do whatever it takes to get her daughter home. Natalie told NBC News, "I will never, ever, never stop." And more, if I completely understand a parent, standing behind their kid, I get that. It would be tough as a parent in this situation. Nobody wants to believe that their child would do something purposely that resulted in the death of two people. Now, you got a lot here, right? You have a lot of people online saying that, well, she's concocting stories to help support Mackenzie's innocence. I don't know the truth of all that. But what is clear is that there are a lot of people who don't really believe Natalie. I think that's pretty safe to say.
Yeah, I think anytime you have a case like this that's getting a lot of attention, there's a lot of division over the facts, the details. We don't always know every little thing, and obviously we don't have access to someone's personal medical history all the time. But, all of this stuff is sort of fueled debates back and forth between people as to what's true here and what's not.
And the one thing you're going to have in a case like this that's been so well publicized is online speculation. There's no way to stop it, and there's a lot of it out there.
It seems that perhaps the biggest reason to doubt any kind of medical emergency or loss of consciousness is that someone was in control of the car. 4.7 seconds before the crash, the car was shifted into neutral. It seems that someone in the car had made a move to try and slow it down. It may have been Dominic or even Davion reaching forward from the back seat to try and prevent a crash. But according to court documents, it was quickly shifted right back into drive as the accelerator was fully depressed.
Maybe one of the most damning facts was that Mackenzie had driven that route just 3 days before, as if she had been scoping out the perfect location for carrying out her plan. This was not a route she normally took, and apparently it wasn't even necessary for her to take that road to get to Davion or Dominic's homes. Now, this isn't proof that she was planning a murder, but it definitely gives weight to the idea that she was looking for a good place to crash her car. And in all of those videos of her driving around, she was never wearing her seatbelt properly, if at all. When she crashed, she was the only one in the car wearing a seatbelt. It likely saved her life. Dominic and Davion suffered severe head trauma, probably from being pitched forward, while Mackenzie was initially held in place and protected by the airbags.
All of this was enough for prosecutors. They felt they had a strong enough case against Mackenzie. In their minds, this was no longer a tragic accident. It was a double murder. The manner of death for both Davion and Dominic was changed from accidental to homicide. On November 4th, 2022, Mackenzie was arrested on her way home from a physical therapy appointment, and she was charged with 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools. She was tried as an adult, despite not being 18 years of age yet.
And more, if you and I both have girls, I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to have your 17-year-old daughter be charged with double murder, 4 counts of murder. I really have no idea the range of emotions that, number one, Mackenzie would go through, and then, her family, but you also have the families of Davion and Dominic, who we talked about, right? At a certain point, maybe very early on, I don't believe they thought this was an accident. Now, Mackenzie's family did. So you can only imagine all the different emotions that were going on. And then for Mackenzie at 17 years old to be arrested, and not arrested for some little, kind of small thing. This is, you detailed it out. 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, aggravated vehicular homicide. I mean, these are very serious charges. Now, on the one hand, if she did this on purpose, all the charges are justified. If she didn't, man, that would be tough.
Yeah, this is one of the situations where we don't know the truth. We don't really know. We weren't in that car. We didn't witness it. So we have to sort of take the prosecution's word that they've gathered enough evidence to prove that this wasn't some kind of medical emergency, wasn't an accident. And I think that's what sort of has really fueled this case and allowed people to take both sides and sort of, theorize as to what could have happened. Was this something Mackenzie did on purpose? Is she looking guiltier of something that she had no control over? And it's one of the things that makes people talk about this case so much.
Yeah, I do think by and large, this is exactly what has grabbed people's attention. Now, Mackenzie claimed in court docs to have no memory of the crash, stating that she recalled starting to turn onto Progress Road, but that everything after that fades to black. At one point, she claimed she wanted to undergo hypnosis to try to make herself remember, but to this day, her story is that she turned onto Progress Road and then woke up in the hospital. No one can actually say for sure that she's lying. We can't see into her brain and say, see, the memory is right there. She's hiding the truth. But it is terribly convenient for her story if she wants to hide the truth. There were no mechanical or electronic issues found with her car. The vehicle was being controlled. She was known to drive recklessly and had threatened to crash in the past. To prosecutors and a lot of other people, it seemed more and more likely that Mackenzie and Mackenzie alone was responsible for the crash and had caused it purposefully.
Mackenzie's only defense was a potential medical episode caused by something like POTS. But as we already discussed, there was no evidence that Mackenzie suffered any kind of medical issue, and no expert was called to testify that she even had POTS, or explain whether it could cause a loss of consciousness when someone was driving. Mackenzie chose not to have her fate decided by a jury of her peers. Instead, she opted for a bench trial in front of a single judge. She was hoping for some leniency, hoping that even if she were found guilty, a judge would believe she could be rehabilitated since she was so young and might go easy on the jail time in exchange for other punishments that could be ordered, like probation, driving classes, or even making her surrender her driver's license.
And to me, Morf, I don't think this is a bad decision. I mean, people may differ on this point, but when you're in front of a jury, juries can get emotional. We're all human. The judge definitely probably less emotional, right? More on the facts and things like that. So in a case like this, it might not be a bad idea to forego the jury and, just have the evidence decided by a judge.
Yeah, I don't know what went into the decision to go that route. If someone advised her, her attorney or whatever, that would be the wiser way to go. But, you're putting your faith in one person. And I think Mackenzie was hoping that would give her a better outcome.
Yeah, I'm sure it was calculated. I'm sure it was based on advice of her counsel. On August 14, 2023, Mackenzie was found guilty on all 12 counts. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, who was not in any way related to Dominic, despite their shared last name, sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Now, a lot of listeners might think that 15 years for a double murder is a light sentence, but when Judge Russo handed it down, it was with the belief that Mackenzie would be denied parole. If she wants to get out in just 15 years, she'll need to lead an exemplary life behind bars and take some real accountability. She will need to be able to prove to the parole board that she understands the weight of her actions enough to not repeat them. She has to prove that she won't be a danger to anyone and that she can be a productive member of society. And if she ever does get out of prison, she will never be able to legally drive again. Her driver's license has been suspended for life. So she's found guilty on all 12 counts. That's pretty definitive. and the judge hands down a sentence of 15 years to life. I mean, could she get out in 15 years? Yeah, possibly. I don't know that most people get paroled their first time up. I doubt that she will spend the rest of her life in prison, though. I'm sure she will be paroled at some point. Now, the one thing I will say is that if she hopes to get parole, she's going to have to act much differently in prison than she did as a free person, because her behavior, Morf, and we talked about some of it, but, you know, the videos that she made, a lot of it she documented against herself. They didn't paint her in a good light at all. And I'm sure a lot of that was brought up in court, and some of it probably went a long way.
Yeah, and there was a lot of background information, too, that became apparent that they had to consider as well. And that helped demonstrate that she had a pattern of, you know, troubling behavior, troubling statements. I think that all played into the final outcome.
Now, I don't know if the decision to, you know, just have the judge decide was good or not. Don't know what a jury would have done. They could have come back with an even harsher sentence. I mean, it's hard to get harsher than life in this situation, but maybe the parole would have been even longer. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a real gamble that you take, and you maybe second guess yourself if the outcome isn't what you hope for.
Now, the flip side of that is that you could have had somebody on the jury who just didn't believe that the prosecution had enough evidence. And maybe the trial could have gone in a completely different direction.
There are a lot of people in online forums and discussion threads trying to find satisfying answers, trying to find the medical condition that could have caused this, trying to find some kind of explanation. They want to make sense of why all this happened. Most of them simply can't accept that someone would be willing to intentionally take out someone they called their soulmate, even knowing that there was a third person in the car. It can't be that someone could make such an awful, world-shattering decision in just 6 minutes.
And to me, it's totally understandable, right? That people are trying to make sense of this, because this is one of those cases that is very hard to make sense of. There's not a lot of sense to be found, I guess, is the best way to say it. But this case is not the only one where a vehicle was used as a weapon, even in like a murder-suicide type case. One of these tragedies that comes to mind was recorded by a dash cam focused on the inside of the car. There was no sound, but you can tell that the two individuals were having some kind of disagreement, according to NBC Washington. You can also clearly tell what Dorothy Fontaine's last words were on April 5th, 2023. And those were, "No, Empress is in the car." She yelled this as she was bracing for impact. Her 5-year-old daughter, Empress, can be seen sitting in the back seat, completely unaware that the car had swerved into oncoming traffic. Dorothy's boyfriend, Mustafa Al-Jazari, had sped from a left turn lane all the way across an intersection, driving the wrong way.
Just like in the crash in which Mackenzie was driving, there were no skid marks, and most of the damage to the car was located on the passenger side. And just as Mackenzie survived the crash that killed Davion and Dominic, Mustafa survived the crash that killed Dorothy and Empress. Just like when Mackenzie was driving, the available video shows that Mustafa wasn't driving erratically until just before the crash. And Dorothy never reached for the steering wheel. She just tensed up and waited for the crash. The accelerator would have been fully depressed, with someone controlling the wheel, and two innocent victims completely helpless to stop what was going to happen. The situations are incredibly similar. What's scary is that cars are central to most of our lives, and we're in or around them every day. We know they can kill, but it's usually an unwanted and traumatic accident, not something like this. And even when we think about people using cars to kill people, it's usually by hitting a pedestrian or mowing down people in a crowd. It doesn't usually involve severely injuring yourself in the process.
What's disappointing is we still don't know exactly why this happened and why it was that Mackenzie chose to do this. You can say it was domestic violence or an act of self-harm or a crime of passion, but we don't know what triggered this at that exact moment. According to those at the party the night before, everything seemed fine. Mackenzie and Dominic weren't seen fighting there. Their relationship had been strained for months. So what changed in those few minutes after they got in the car? And why in such a drastic manner? Mackenzie had made threats before. What made her finally follow through with them?
According to Dominic's brother, Angelo, Dominic wanted to break up with Mackenzie. Whether he brought this up just before they got into the car or during the drive, we have no idea. But it could easily be a case of, if I can't have you, no one can. We know that the most dangerous time for a person experiencing domestic violence is when they try to leave the situation. Maybe Mackenzie wasn't even trying to actually crash the car. Maybe it was a bluff, at least at first, a way to scare Dominic and threaten him. It's extremely common for abusers to trap their victims in a car and drive in a way that scares them. You can't really do anything to fight back, or you risk being the reason the car actually crashes. And if you jump out, you risk getting seriously injured.
But this not knowing exactly why Mackenzie decided to crash the car at that moment is one of the main reasons that people keep searching for some other reasonable explanation. It just seemed to happen so fast. It doesn't seem like there was any time for anything to even set her off. But this is part of why prosecutors believe this was a premeditated crime. If she had just been waiting for the right moment, it didn't happen as fast as it seems at all. 6 minutes becomes 3 days or 3 weeks or even 3 months. However long it was actually an idea bouncing around in her head. Davion's presence in the car also makes people feel like there must be some other reason that this happened. Maybe she was upset with Dominic, but why would she crash the car with Davion in it too? If she didn't feel that she would be around to face the consequences, as investigators believe her intention was to end her own life and kill Dominic in the process, then there was no real reason to let Davion being there ruin her plans. It could also be that maybe Dominic, thinking he'd be safer with the third person in the car, chose that moment to tell Mackenzie he wanted to end the relationship, and she lost it. And to me, again, just another reason why, people are so fascinated by this case. And there's so much back and forth online about it. When everything is not laid out, not known exactly how it went down, well, again, it leads to speculation. You've got a lot of theories in this case, from it being intentional, as the judge found it to be, and why it was intentional, to it being accidental, medical, all these things. But sticking with the intentional, was it that Dominic wanted out of the relationship? And during this drive is when he decided to tell Mackenzie that it was over. It's a real possibility. You have to at least entertain it.
Yeah, and it's that short ride for me that is interesting, because they had been out seemingly okay, partying, having fun, and then something in that very short time happened, and you have to wonder, was something said, was something done that changed the atmosphere and caused this quick decision, or was this something that was being planned out? And I think what's frustrating is that these are the things we can't really know the answers to. In September 2023, Mackenzie filed an appeal, but her conviction was upheld. In October 2024, a motion for post-conviction relief was denied. In May of 2025, an appeals court refused to review the case. She plans to exhaust all of her appeal options, which prevents the Russo and Flanagan families from feeling any sense of closure. Davion's father, Scott Flanagan, tired of all Mackenzie's efforts to get out of prison, told NBC News, "It seriously never ends. How many chances does she get when our son and Dominic didn't get a single one?" He compared the constant appeals to a scab being constantly ripped off. Dominic's older sister, Christine Russo, said, "There's no resting. There's no finding peace." She discussed domestic violence and toxic relationships, as well as deep diving misinformation in this case on her podcast, The Big Sister Unhinged. If the case is keeping her up at night anyway, she might as well use the attention on the case to help educate people about the warning signs of a toxic relationship. Maybe she can turn her pain into something that helps others.
And we see that quite a bit, right? People involved in a very traumatic case find a way to help others. Whether that is setting up, a foundation in their loved one's name. In this case, it might be a podcast that helps educate listeners about domestic violence and toxic relationships. I think that's pretty common, Morf, for family members to try to find an outlet for their pain and actually do some good in the process.
Yeah, this is just a bad case all the way around. 2 lives lost, and the families having to watch as they feel the person that is responsible is trying to just repeatedly get out of prison and not really serve her time. And that's got to be very frustrating. But if someone like his sister can have a voice on her podcast and talk about this case, since people are already talking about it, and clear the air on some things, and that's a really good outlet, it seems.
Well, the one thing that I'm sure of is that nobody wins, right, in a case like this. Now, a lot of people are critical of Mackenzie's family and their parenting. Now, whether that's warranted or not, people have to make their own decisions, but they don't win either, right? They lost a daughter. She's still alive, but she's going to be in prison for a long time. And obviously you have Davion's family, Dominic's family. They did lose someone forever. This is, like you said, just a tragic case all the way around. And if you're a listener looking for answers, we're sorry, but we don't have them. Nobody really does, other than Mackenzie, and she's not talking. What is clear is that all 3 occupants in that car lost everything. Mackenzie lost her freedom, and Davion and Dominic lost their lives. Davion wanted to become a barber, and he hoped to one day have a shop of his own. At the time of his death, he was waiting for a decision. On his application to All-State Hairstyling and Barber College, a memorial scholarship was established in his name to help people with a similar goal, pay for school and the state licensing exam, so that they can achieve their dreams like Davion would have if his life hadn't been tragically cut short.
Mackenzie maintains that she had no intention to kill Dominic or Davion, accepting guilt for vehicular homicide, but not for murder. She told Oxygen.com, "I'm not saying I'm innocent. I was a driver of a tragedy, but I'm not a murderer." She's currently incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. Her first chance at parole will come on October 29th, 2037.
So as we wrap this one up more, it is, as we said, a fascinating case, a tragic case, definitely one of those that a lot of people have and are paying attention to. It's also a case, I think, where people are divided. Some people are in the camp that, she's definitely guilty. She did it on purpose. Some people are in the camp that she didn't do it on purpose. And then there's probably people in the camp of, I'm just not sure. I don't know exactly what she did. And I'm not sure that it went down either way. Now, when we were in CrimeCon in Vegas, a lot of people came up to me on Podcast Row and wanted to talk about this case. And I will say that I believe everyone I talked to about it was in the camp of her being guilty. And I think if you look online, there's more people in that camp than any other.
Yeah, I heard a lot of discussion too about this and about the attention that centers around Mackenzie and, what did she know in advance? Did she plan this? Was this a spur of the moment thing? And then there's still defenders too that sort of think maybe there's some reason why this happened that she couldn't control. And I think that's what continues to drive discussion of this My wife watched the Netflix documentary, and she doesn't usually watch true crime. And she was like, oh, I can't believe this case. It's just one of those cases that makes you go, wow, what happened here?
Yeah, I know my oldest daughter has been fascinated by this one as well. She's watched everything she can on this case. But we said it from the very beginning, right? We're here to put out all the known facts, the details that we can find, and it's up to everybody to make their own decision as to what they think happened. But that's it for our episode on Mackenzie Shirilla. As always, if you love the show but haven't done so yet, take a minute, go out, leave us a rating, a review. Also, keep telling your friends. Word of mouth about the podcast really goes a long way.
If you want to find us on social media, we're on every major platform. Just search for Criminology Podcast on your favorites. And for news about the show, old episodes, and more, head over to our website, criminologypodcast.com. And if you want to join a discussion about the show and the cases we discuss, head over to Facebook and search for Criminology Podcast, Discussion and Fans.
So that's it for another episode of Criminology, but Morf and I will be back with all of you next Saturday night with a brand new episode. So until then, for Mike
and Morf,
we'll talk to you next week.
Take care, everyone.